I am here today to welcome our guest, Bigfoot Michigan Rob. And Rob, you have a new book out about Bigfoot cryptid encounters.
Yeah,
So tell me a little bit about the book.
I certainly will. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, this is my second book. My first book was Bigfoot in Michigan Rob presents True Cryptid Encounters Book One, and now Book Two has been out since last summer. They've been out 20, 19, 23, and 24. Nothing here in 25. I'm putting that to bed for a little while. And yeah, so we'll talk about. I got a bunch of cool encounters from the books, and really briefly, how this even started was when I had my own personal encounter. I shared with this on your show some time ago, and that's really what got the ball rolling for me when I started investigating cryptids, Bigfoot, and all these dogman things like that. And so throughout the years, then I started a podcast a couple of years after my encounter, and then I started advertising like a lot of us do that. Hey, send me your encounter stories, if I can publish them or make a video or whatever. And most people were gracious, and so they started trickling in slowly but surely. And then I did some on some of my shows, and but I archived a lot of them. And one day I was thinking, boy, I've got so many different cool, unique experiences from these people. It was suggested to me, maybe Rob, you should maybe put out a book or so. So then I went through that and contacted the people. I said, look, I know you said that I could use your things, but here's what my plans are doing a book. Most people were very welcome, receptive. Yeah, as long as our names are in anonymity, no problem. So that was good. That was pretty smooth sailing. And then so I just took it from there, and so I started compiling these things. And there's a total in both books, Linda. There's probably 103, 104 stories. Some are short and some are in depth. And so yeah, I'm gonna share a couple from book two, and we'll just get it started from there. Um,
Sounds good. So it says Bigfoot and cryptids. About how many cryptids would you say total that you've had stories regarding?
well, the book is made primarily. You've got a lot of Bigfoot and Dogman, and probably I'll be honest with you. There's 60% Dogman, 40% Bigfoot. Now there's alien abduction in some of them, a ghost one. So it's primarily the cryptids, focusing on Bigfoot and Dogman, and then a couple other spooky things like a really cool alien abduction story, which is like fascinating.
Well,
So yeah,
yeah, let's go through some of those. Which ones seem to impress you the most?
well, I like, and I will say this, and they're from all of the states, in the lower 48. There's maybe 10 or 15% are from Michigan, because I got a lot of Michigan accounts in here. And then there's Ohio, Illinois, California, Texas. Most every state is represented, most. So, but the ones that always impress me, certainly a lot of the ones from Michigan, since I live here and, I do my investigations here when I have an opportunity. And especially in Wexford County, which is the Manistee National Forest, which is alleged has a lot of curses involved with this land, which I found out later on in life after I started researching a lot from the Upper Peninsula. So one of the first ones that really struck me was in the Porcupine Mountains of the Upper Peninsula. And it struck me because my grandfather years ago had property in the Porcupine Mountains. And when I got this story, I said, wow, I'm going to dive into this and see what it's all about. And the story goes on about this Bigfoot researcher. His name is Randy. And as I was going through his information, he's like, Rob, I caught your channel. This is pretty cool. And I'm sending you this story. Several years ago, this was. And so it goes on about how he has been an investigator in the Upper Peninsula, the Porcupine Mountains, for probably 3 or 4 years. And during this story, he went on to tell me that He had never seen an actual Bigfoot in his life. He saw some tracks like we all come across. The other things, you heard some hoots, some whoops, if you will, and some weird tree structures here in the Porcupine Mountains. And so he says one day he's traveling down the interstate in an area he had not explored before, and he pulled off on the side of the road and saw, and he was walking along the tree line. Then it was very dense, and then he saw like a small opening, which he went inside. It was kind of it was an overgrown trail. Not a lot of people had traveled, so he was kind of cutting through it. But there was something about this pathway that intrigued him. But then he realized that it was so thick and overgrown that what he had with him was just a small machete that he couldn't really forge on through. So he had left maybe 20 feet into the wood line, and he went back home. And I guess he got a bigger machete, and it's something he wanted to go back and just kind of cut his pathway through. So about 2 or 3 weeks later, he ventures back to this path. And as he's walking, as he's foraging about, cutting down the branches, he finally found an opening, which was more manageable on foot. And he started walking. And then as he got further into the tree line, he noticed this kind of like an above ground. He said it reminded him of a cave, but it really wasn't a cave, but it was forged almost like the tunnel was made, where he could walk in, and all the coverings of the brush, the trees, it kind of I guess the shape we would call it would be like a half circle where he could get in, and on either side it was just thick walls of brush, and even at the top, like the ceiling, if you will, it was very dark, not a lot of light in here. And he was fascinated, so he started following this path. And as he's following down this path, he's getting deeper and deeper into his travel, traversing through this tunnel, as above ground tunnel made of trees. And then he noticed this stench, he says, Rob, and it was kind of a foul odor. And as he's walking, he tripped and fell. Now, Linda, as he trips and as he falls, he lands, and it was kind of like he felt this warm substance, kind of gooey. And again, it's kind of the sunlight is coming through, but it was still kind of dark. And as he got up, he was kind of scared, and he noticed there was blood on his hands and forearms. And he looks down, and it was a fresh carcass of a deer that had been just laying there, kind of ripped apart, really. And so he really got spooked out. And then as he turns around, he says, "Man, I think I might have stumbled into perhaps a bear's den or something, right?" And as he turns around, he starts walking back about 4 or 5 feet. Then he realizes that he stops. There's a little break, and a little bit of light was coming through, still very dim, very dark. And he noticed this set of glowing eyes that hovered maybe about a foot above the ground. And he says, Rob, these eyes they were spread apart. Very, not like a human eyes, but they were like a good 8 inches across. And then he's staring in at this set of eyes, and it starts advancing towards him a little bit. And then he notices, as it's getting closer, he sees appendages that were almost from either side of the walls of this above ground cave made of trees, but he can't quite make out what it is, but he notices their legs. And he's not thinking Bigfoot. And again, as I said, he was always searching for Bigfoot, but he's at this point, he's not thinking that. He's thinking this is some gigantic spider, because it reminded him of a spider, but a huge spider. Now, I will say to everybody and yourself listening that either side of the walls of this, again, cave of trees, the distance was probably a good 5.5 or 6 feet from each side. So these appendages were extended out quite long. It was very long, and these eyes are hovering. So he's like, "Oh boy, what is this?" So now he has no other choice but to turn back around, go back over the carcass that he's tripped over, and he starts going towards the tunnel. And he says, "Robin, I know this thing is following." He says, "I dare not look back. I dare not run because, most people that are taught in the woods, hunters, trackers, you don't run from a predator," which he's thinking this is. And he picks up his pace and he can hear in the background, kind of like the footfall, but he can't quite make out this footfall. And he's thinking, boy, this tunnel's not ending. He's hoping that there would be daybreak at the other end of this tunnel. And he says Robbie's terrified. And he's advancing. He finally sees a break of daylight ahead. He finally sees, thank you, there's an exit. And he keeps walking then, or maybe briskly walking. And then he turns around and this thing is still in back of him. It's still advancing, not fast, but at a pace. So he gets out, finally gets to the end of this tunnel, tree tunnel, kind of trips and he falls in this open meadow. In the daylight, he thinks, thank you, here's the sun. The whole meadow was lit up. And maybe another 100 yards in front of him is another forest and another tree line. So he gets up and he dares not to look back again. He keeps walking, keeps walking. Then he stops. He said, "Rob, for whatever the reason, because I am a researcher, I mean, I should not be scared." He goes, I felt a little safer. And he turns around, and when he looks back over his shoulder, he says, "Rob, there was this creature." He goes, "I'm assuming it's Bigfoot." Was not quite sure, but now it wasn't the eye, it was standing there. He said it had been 8 or 9 foot tall, very wide. It wasn't like a spider like he had thought, but he wasn't staring at it very longly, just knowing that it was not natural. And then he takes his eyes off of it. And he starts advancing towards the tree line, takes another look, and this thing, whatever it was, as he describes, assumingly it's a Bigfoot, turns around, goes back into the tunnel, and right before it enters the tunnel, it lets out this roar. He goes, not quite like the whoop that we all hear on certain audios, but it was just very odd to him. So now as he's advancing toward this other tree line, he stops and he realizes he really doesn't know where he's at now. And he did not dare go back the same way that he just came out of, obviously. So he says, "Well, this is my hometown. I live in the Porcupine Mountains. There's got to be an interstate somewhere." So he gets up to the tree line and sees an open trail. So he gets on this trail. He's walking down this trail. He says maybe 10, 11 minutes. Gets out, and finally there's the interstate. So at least he's in a familiar area. He knows what the interstate is. And he says, oddly enough, Rob, here's the weird thing. He goes, this entire experience of traveling through the tunnel was maybe a total of 10 minutes in length. But then when he got out, he notices that he's probably the location of the highway markers. He was like a good hour and a half away from his vehicle, which he thought was very odd. And again, he's kind of a little taken aback. So I believe he said he was going north or south, walking, hoping to see a vehicle, maybe stop and give him a lift to his car. Several minutes goes by, then he sees a logging truck come down the road. And he kind of stops, waves him on, and the man driving the logging vehicle stops, asks him, "Hey, partner, you lost? I mean, you need a lift?" He goes, "Yeah." And then the trucker, that's this guy, Randy, into the vehicle, into his truck, got up in there. And then the trucker gave him an odd look, and he couldn't figure out why this trucker was giving him an odd look. And he kind of was like, and the trucker says to him, "Did I make a mistake picking you up?" He goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you're covered in blood." So he didn't even realize, Linda, that when he fell down, I mean, his shirt was covered, his hands, he's got the dry blood. He kind of forgot about all that. He goes, "No, I got to tell you, I had this weird experience in this tunnel. This is blood from a dead deer." And he goes, I think and then he says to the trucker, not saying that what he thinks it was. He didn't tell him about thinking it was a big spider. Then all of a sudden it wasn't. It was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, so on and so forth. And then he kind of told him that, admitting that, editing all that out. And the truck driver says, "Oh," he goes, "Yeah, you can be honest with me." He says, "You came across Sasquatch." He goes, "Didn't you not know that Sasquatch roamed the Porcupine Mountains?" He goes, "Well, yeah." He goes, I'm into Sasquatch. I'm a researcher, never seen one." He goes, "Yeah, sounds like you did." And so they had a conversation and got him to his vehicle. And he went on about his business. And then, so when I'm talking to this man, Randy, the question that he was exhilarated. He was glad he made it out in one piece. He thinks it was a Sasquatch. I mean, the truck driver kind of confirmed that there's Sasquatch in the area. But he says, "Rob, I don't know what it was, though. I can't believe, in accordance to where the tunnel was and how much time he spent traveling the tunnel, he said there was no way that he should have been an hour and a half or 2 hours away from his car." And he thought that was really of all things, the oddest part about that experience. And my thoughts were, I mean, I don't know really. I said, maybe, I don't know what to tell you. I think we can lose track of where we're at in the forest because, for those that have been in the forest, you can think you're walking on a trail for 5 minutes and it could be 50 minutes. But I don't know because we hear things about lost time, portals, this, that, and the other. I don't think this is quite the case. But I did think that was kind of odd about that particular instance.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really fascinating story. So, did he ever try to go back to that area and do any research by
He's
himself?
been
Mhm.
he's been back. And here's another odd thing. He followed up with me maybe several months later. "Rob, this is Randy again. I just want to, follow up with the story I told you about." He goes, "I don't know what it is, but this is another odd thing." He knows exactly where he entered. And he says, "Rob, for the life of me, I cannot find the point at which to get back in." So he has not been back to that same tunnel. It says it's almost like he goes, "It didn't overgrow that much because he was back within several weeks." But also to answer your question, yeah, he still researches in that area, but now he sets up his location where he had this experience. He covers like a 3 mile point, and he's getting more familiar with the town and the road. So in case something happens again, he'll know where he's at. So yeah, so nothing back from this man. He had that experience. Just thought it was odd how a man that's lived there his whole life kind of got lost like that, and how he lost track of the time, which I think is understandable. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know.
it's interesting because there was the point of entry, which I assume wasn't a huge distance from his car, and then there was the point of exit at the meadow.
Yeah,
You would think, between one or the other, he could have maybe found that tunnel again.
you would have thought so. And he says he's been up and down that road. He knows exactly where he parked. He said, "Rob, I even found the same parking spot on the side of the road where I left my Jeep." And he goes, "I've walked up and down 50, 80, 100 yards back and forth and nothing." I mean, he said the opening that he found was enough where you would notice it if you were walking the tree line, but nothing. It's almost like it wasn't even there. And he says he went back maybe 3 weeks after this incident. He goes, "Rob, I know the vegetation, the brush grows fast, but not where it totally covers everything up." He says, plus he hacked his way in and even made it more visible and more friendly for himself to get into. So that was kind of odd too, Linda. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't live up there. I don't know how it rains, this, that, and the other. I don't think the growth covers up that quickly, in my opinion. I could be wrong.
Especially if he hacked his way in, there would have been some evidence, perhaps, of, where he cut off
Cut limbs?
inches and
Yeah,
yeah, limbs and things.
yeah.
Yeah. It does seem like that would have been the case. Yeah, but I've heard a few stories myself about people having some very unusual experiences with Bigfoot or otherwise, and they just can never go back to that location. It's like it doesn't exist. It's like they can't find it.
Oh,
I remember a story of a woman and her mother who were headed from a fairly large town back home, and it was a 2 or 3 hour drive, and they came across some road construction about an hour away from their hometown, had to take a detour down a road, and it was newly paved road, and
okay.
it wound around back, and eventually they came into their hometown. But they didn't, it was unfamiliar to them. They didn't recognize this road. It wasn't that far away from their home. They didn't know how exactly it was going to come into their town, but they did come into the town. They knew the businesses and such that they drove by. And then later on they tried to find that same highway. It was newly paved, so it should have stood out.
Okay.
Nothing. They could find nothing regarding that, but they had
Wow.
this very unusual kind of missing time encounter during that time frame when they were on that road. Both of them saw an unusual light in the sky, and then both of them had some memory of just kind of something weird happened, but they didn't know for sure what. Later on they did go under hypnosis, and both of them described the same type of encounter under hypnotic state separately, of a UFO coming down from the sky. And those types of experiences do tell you that there's some strange thing happen, and either it's something has changed in the reality of the physical world, or you reported somewhere else in your mind and had a different type of experience that wasn't really very physical.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I get many stories like that, and, and you've heard them. There's that one there, and of course, nothing ever goes as planned, Linda, because I wasn't going to tell this story. But now they're on this topic. There's one that I've just got to share now because and it wasn't planned today, so I'm just totally winging this one. There is this man, and again, this does not take place in Michigan, but in Ohio, and I forget the name of the forest, but it's in Ohio, right around like the Ohio Howls, right? You've heard of that before. And this man, he had been 20 years now. He's not a Bigfoot researcher, nothing like that, but he is an avid hiker, fisherman, hunter, explorer, loves the woods. That is like his second home, away from home. And he had always gone to this same campsite, camping area within a few miles. Okay. And there was always this river. He loved the place because where he set up camp, Linda, there was this nice river or stream that flowed around. It went on for miles. And he loved it because he could go down and fish. He loved fishing. In fact, he said he kind of roughed it when he went. He took the tent, and what he did was he didn't bring food, maybe some beef jerky and some water, but he would always just go fishing in the stream and catch some fish, right? So but there was always a trail too that kind of paralleled this river, which he always would walk. So he says one morning, it's about 7, 8 in the morning. He gets up, second day on his little camping trip, and he goes down to the river. Doesn't catch any fish. So what he does, he gets his gear, his tackle box, his fishing rod, puts in his hands, and goes up from the bank of the river, and he gets on the trail that he's always traversed. He's on the trail walking maybe a couple miles. And then all of a sudden on this trail, and he says, and Rob, I know this section of the forest like the back of my hands. I've been doing the same area for like 20 years. And then he found it odd that there was this offbeat trail off to his left that he never come across. And so he did think it was kind of odd. So of course he's all inquisitive and just I got to check this out, something new. And he's kind of excited, right? So he turns down this path of this trail and he's walking down the trail, Linda. Now, in the background, the river that he fishes, you can always hear the river in the background, right? I mean, it's not one of these torrent rivers with a huge pace, but you can always hear the water flow. And as he's traversing off down this new undiscovered trail, he notices that the trail starts getting narrower and narrower, but he still forges on, moving forward. And then all of a sudden, he stops and found it odd because you could no longer hear the river. On this story, by the way, is in book two. So he could no longer hear the river. And he says that even you could always hear the birds, or you could hear, little rodents, squirrels, whatever, running around. Didn't hear anything. It's almost like everything was a death. It was eerily quiet. He says it's now right around 11 o'clock in the morning. It's kind of, it's daytime, but but it was, shadowy. Anytime you're in the woods, it's always shadowy. But he says the odd thing is that the trees, the brush, everything that he's familiar with, they took on a different look about it. He says that as an example, if they're all spruce trees, they all now were pine. I mean, it was just totally the trees, everything was just different, unfamiliar. This guy thinks, wow, I can't believe that I'm lost. And this is very eerie. I don't know what this is. These trees don't exist in this part of where I've been exploring for 20 years. So he kind of, lost his wits about himself for a little bit, Linda. So he sees this stump and he's kind of does not want to get in panic mode because he's kind of panicking. He goes, Rob, for a man of 20 years with my experience, I am panicking. He sits down on this stump. And again, everything is quiet. Can't hear the river, can't hear any animals, no wind. Kind of, the trees are kind of shading the sun. And then he looks into the forest and he says, Rob, I see this dark shadow and it's kind of approaching. He goes, as a humanoid looking figure. And he says, but the thing about it is I can't make it out. It was like a black mass, but I can definitely tell that it has a shape and a form, like a very tall, very wide person. He even made mention he saw a head, a conical type of head, but he can't make out any description. He can't see a face. He can't see hair. It's just a shadow. So now he's further getting a little bit spooked. And again, he's not a researcher. He's not into Bigfoot. Probably knows about Bigfoot. I didn't ask. So, excuse me. So, and he's just looking at this shadow. Then all of a sudden, the shadow, it kind of disappears. And then as he starts looking around the area, he notices that these trees, they're very wide, much wider than what should be. He says the stumps were maybe 4.5 feet in diameter, very thick, not unlike what they're supposed to be. He goes, I can't believe this is bizarre. He says, like the Twilight Zone. And then he says something was projected in his mind that said, follow the trees. He goes, I don't know where that came from, but it said follow the trees, but he could not make that out, Linda, because follow the trees, what the hell does that mean? There's these weird trees all around me. So as he's looking around, he says that he sees images start to kind of manifest into the stumps of these trees. Now, I don't mean stumps like they're cut down. I mean at the base of the tree, he sees like these images, almost like faces, start to kind of emerge. And he says he squints his eyes. He's like, I'm not awake. I'm not dreaming. This is so bizarre. What? And there's images, and they would kind of come out of the tree and kind of go back into the tree. Now, this guy is beyond terrified. But then he remembers wherever this came from, the projection of follow the trees. So this man gets up knowing that he's lost, and these images would pop out along the tree. So he started following every time he saw like an image come from the tree, he would follow it down the tree line. He says, Rob, I'm doing this for maybe 7, 8, 9 minutes. And then all of a sudden, that image of that tall, humanoid, dark mass shows up again. And then it kind of fades away again. He continues to traverse along this tree line, and then the faces stop. And he keeps walking, though, along this path. And then all of a sudden, he hears rushing water. And he's getting still unfamiliar ground territory, but he hears rushing water, much like that of the river or the stream that he fishes. Continues on. Current's getting stronger, the sound's getting stronger. All of a sudden, he starts hearing birds, and all of a sudden, the trees become more familiar. And all of a sudden, he gets back on the path, comes out to the path, and now he's back in familiar grounds. Now the river he can see from the path, and he's on his path. Now he knows where he's at. He's relieved, follows around the bend, gets to his campsite, and sits down at his camp. And he wondered if he was going crazy, what happened to him. And like a lot of the people that I talked to, he asked me what my thoughts were. And I immediately went to that he must have slipped in some sort of dimension or portal out in the woods, because I have friends that have actually experienced portals. A good friend of mine, a researcher, had a person almost slip into a portal. You could see him disappear on thermal, which is somebody else's story. That's a friend of mine. I'm not going to tell that one. But and I learned that 3 years ago at a conference. So my first thing I told this guy is maybe slip into a portal in the woods, because I think there's portals in the woods, not just in outer space. I mean, there are portals I heard in people's houses sometimes opening up, or their backyards, right? So that's the only thing that he slipped into a different dimension. I'm guessing, Linda, right? And the things that he told me, and I've been studying elementals of the forest and things like that. And I'm kind of saying maybe it was a forest elemental. Very odd. It almost sounds kind of like one of those Harry Potter, movies, right? I mean, about trees walking. I don't know if it's Harry Potter. I don't really watch that stuff, but just so odd to me. I mean, I'm wondering what's your take on that, because I 90% of me believes this guy that he slipped into a different realm.
Yeah, exactly. And I have heard numerous stories like that. And what I have heard from people that do research on this sort of thing, and I've done quite a bit on the UFO, so not so much in the woods, however, but otherwise. But often these portals have a really strong electromagnetic field around them, and that's
Yeah.
measurable. So we used to take a Geiger counter out with us, when we would do UFO research. I've heard of a few people starting to do that now with Bigfoot research, where they're
Okay.
actually, going out and what they're finding is anytime you have a track, Bigfoot track, there's going to be a higher measurement of electromagnetic fields there. So this may have something to do with a type of, a real physics kind of thing that's happening, but we don't understand it fully whenever we pass through that field or encounter that field. Now, I know, I think it's Trey Hudson that researches the meadow.
That's what I
And
was, yeah, that's
yeah,
who I was referring to about the cube.
yes, the cube, and they
Yeah.
have also found a high level of electromagnetic field out there. And we know everything underneath the sun happens out there. There's that cube.
Yeah.
There are UFOs show up. There are Bigfoot evidence out there. There's all kinds of things that happen in that meadow, like as if there's something there that's really a physics phenomena. But we experience those things differently whenever we pass through them. It's like a different reality almost for us.
Yes, that's what I was referring to a little bit. And, I was talking with him and another friend of ours who's going to be at our conference, Brian Bowden, talked about what you just brought about the electromagnetic fields. And the thing is, and the energy, right? And the thing is, too, about these folks that have experienced portals. I mean, Linda, I mean, they give off, I assume, they give off some sort of radiation because of a lot of people have gotten very sick, and cutting cancers and things. And I'm not even talking about referring to Trey's friend. I'm even referring to researchers that have been hit with infrasound and things over the years, which they seem to a handful in they pass away too early in life. I've noticed. I'm not going to bring up the names. I think you probably are familiar with what I'm talking about. And I think some of this research get pretty dangerous, or walking around somewhere where you don't know where you're going. You know what I mean? You just don't know what's out there. You got to be fully prepared when it comes to these things. Would you agree, or you think? Have you heard of that as well?
Absolutely. A friend of mine and also a fellow co-anchor on the radio show I used to have, Ted Phillips.
Okay.
He researched an area for an extended period of time. He actually had a little cabin out there where he would stay, and just
Okay.
research this. I mean, everything underneath the sun was happening there. They had UFO craft in the sky, weird kind of light phenomena. Things would be moved. I'm not talking about small things. I'm talking about like trucks and tractors and things like that would be pushed into a barn and such.
Mm.
There was, kind of an explosion of sorts with some farm animals that happened there. They saw Bigfoot prints, footprints walking out on a frozen pond. Just all kinds of things that happened. And at one point in time, Ted and his fellow researcher, Tom, they were driving on this property, and this was a huge piece of land. It's actually two properties, like 750 acres or something like that. And they were driving from one area to another, and they saw this light beam in the sky. And they're researchers. They were curious. They didn't know for sure what they were dealing with, but they stopped the car and they both got out of the car. Probably their number one mistake, but this thing shot a light beam down at them like a laser light or something. Tom's hair turned completely white within, a few weeks or so. They both got really ill. Tom didn't throw up. Ted did. Ted did pass away. I mean, I know he had some health
Mm.
issues, but he did pass away in the next year or two, something like that. I mean, a few years later anyway. And Tom's still living, but he does have some health issues from
Okay.
maybe this incident. But they were dealing with something, and they were. Ted was just such a meticulous researcher, and so he's an engineer by profession, and he was very much to document things. And they had some of the best scientists in the country out there at this location. It's not that far from where I live, actually, but it's in a pretty
Mhm.
remote area. And they had some of the best people. They were never able to really define what was going on there, but certainly there was a lot going on there. Kind of like a Skinwalker Ranch thing.
There's more and more Skinwalker Ranch type places all around the United States popping up. They made it popular, of course, but now there's several. It slips my mind, but okay, talk about the Meadow, and I think there's a place in Missouri which you'd mentioned. There's quite a few, and they all, it seems like they all encompass some sort of high level frequency and energy. We all know about Skinwalker Ranch, and we've heard about the Dogman and all that, but the energy, all the UFO sightings, right? And it's on some sort of metallic substance, I guess, beneath the ground, right? Which is kind of odd. I mean, and I can see where I think a lot of this has to do with the energy put off is attracts all sorts of high strangeness.
Yeah, and there may be just a really thin veil because our
Mm.
perception is so dependent upon our spectrum of sight and our
Yeah.
spectrum of sound, which is very, very narrow. And so there could be things that just broaden that spectrum enough that we're able to perceive things that we can't normally.
No, I would agree with that for sure. And it's just a fascinating the things that we talk about and discuss and research and look into. It's just never ending. That's why I love it's such a big mystery, all this, that I think that people doing these podcasts will be doing this for a while because none of this is ever going to be solved. And I hope it's not, by the way. I
Well, exactly. The mystery is what brings us back all the time, isn't it?
it is the mystery. And I know that you do a lot of Bigfoot on this show. I got another Bigfoot one that I like to bring up and I've got some other ones depending how long you want to go, but I've got this one. This was actually in book one, which I found to be fascinating because we all have heard about Mount Shasta. A lot of high strangeness out in California, right? Yeah, I think it's Mount Shasta. Yeah. And I got this email some time ago, back when I first started, which I found fascinating, about this man. He says he was retired. He says he was pretty wealthy, though. He had his own business. He was in Chicago, Illinois, and he moved to California. And he says, Rob, throughout my life, I was kind of a loner, though. He said he was married for a bit of time. And he also had made mention that he had no kids, not really too many friends. One of his best friends, though, that he did have in life was in California. So his friend says, hey, man, you're retired. Why don't you move out to California in the mountains? He goes, man, I don't know about all that. He says, yeah, it's beautiful. You're retired. You have nobody in Illinois, And so we kind of talked him into it. And the cool thing about this, Linda, is his buddy was a builder. And so, again, this man who made mention to me that he did well for himself. And so he ventured out to California and found a plot of property at the foothills of the mountain. And he decided, yes, this is a great piece of land. So he went and bought the land. He got with his friend that lived maybe an hour and a half outside of this property location. They got together and he built a house. And he says, Rob, I was in no hurry. He stayed with his friend for a little while until the house was where he could move in. And he says he had built a beautiful, I don't know, maybe modest home, 1,500 square foot. It had 2 levels and it overlooked the woods and the mountains in the background. And he says he fell in love. It was just beautiful wildlife in abundance, bald eagles, deer. There was wolves. Just he says it was right up his alley, and he didn't realize it because where he lived in Illinois, it was just outside of Chicago, so he lived pretty much in the city his whole life. And so he says while he was waiting for his house to be built, a lot of the locals, as any outsider comes into anybody's town, they question you where you're from. Oh, you're a transplant from Illinois. And so you got a little bit of flack, how people are. And then people started asking him where he was having his house built, what part of the section of town. He went on and told them, and they said, oh, that's Bigfoot territory, openly. But then, and again, here's another person, not a researcher. And he's like, Bigfoot. Now he's thinking that, well, they're pulling this man's leg because he's new. They want to scare him or put this thought in his head. So he was always kind of laughing it off, Linda, like, okay, whatever. Thank you for for the jokes, this, that, and the other. So his house is finally done. Again, a dual level. On his top deck, he had like a telescope. The bottom deck, the bottom half of the house was open floor plan from what I remember. Then he had a staircase that went to the top. We had a nice big deck on the top where you could hang out and observe the forest, the mountains, and wildlife. So, but you'd always have to traverse back into town because it was like there was nothing around here. It's very secluded. He said it was probably about a 90-minute drive into town to get supplies, get food. So we'd always spend time and load up and get a couple months supplies in advance. And he said, and every time he went back into town, the people would kid him because they got familiar with him about, oh, you see Bigfoot yet? This, that, or the other. No, I haven't. Thanks for the laughs, the jokes, whatever. Thank you. I'm not going anywhere. So goes back and he says he's living there maybe 2 or 3 years, Linda, and then nothing, he's no Bigfoot encounters. He goes, these people are just, screwing with me. So he says, being alone though, and to see humans, you'd have to go back, 90 minutes into town all the time. But he didn't care. He was retired. But he did buy 3 dogs, he says. He bought There were three, I believe, Alaskan Huskies, if I recall, and he named them Larry, Moe, and Curly from the Three Stooges. He says he was a big Three Stooges fan. So yeah, so he had three dogs. And so, time went on. He's out in his yard playing with his dogs. And again, 6 months go by and the dogs are getting a little bit bigger. Then all of a sudden, one night, he's in the house. It was nighttime. And then a big thunderstorm rolled in. Lightning, he could see through his windows. It was just the lights up in the sky and it was just coming down. And the dogs are all hovered around him, just, taking on the night, and they're a little scared because of the thunder. He says the thunder always scared his dogs. And then all of a sudden, he says, then the thunderstorm stopped. And then all of a sudden, he heard this roar from the tree line. He says it was not thunder, it was something, some sort of animal. He can't put his finger on it. But here's this roar, very loud and very deep, very masculine, very robust. He says his dogs, their ears, they perked right up. And they ran around, they ran underneath his dining room table. And he says they never do that. Even when it's thunder, they were scared. So he's like, wow. So it happened the one time, and then he turned in and went to bed. He says the next morning it's kind of damp outside from the rain from the previous night. And he goes out as usual, lets out his dogs, and they leave, and he sees the dogs sniffing around out around the perimeter of his home. And he says they were acting kind of strange, running back and forth. He says, hey, Rob, I went out to investigate what they were looking at, and it's maybe 90 feet from the back of his house. And he sees these very big footprints, human footprints. He says distinguished toes. The ground was still very damp. And he's thinking, whoa, what in the world? So he runs back in his house. He gets a tape measure, brings it out. And he said, Rob, this human foot print, he measured it from toe to the back of the heel, very distinguishable in the ground, the soft ground from the rain. He says, I swear it was like 23 and a half inches long. And maybe at the breadth, at the width, or maybe it approached over 6 inches. And it says it was pointed toward the tree line 90 feet from his house. And it came in and then it kind of stopped and walked back toward the tree line. So he says, Rob, he's following these footprints. And he says the gate had to have been, and it was very parallel, like not how we walk. We've all heard how allegedly Bigfoot would walk in a line, kind of lineal. And he said the gate had been 5 foot, one step to another. He goes, it was just humongous. He goes, this is unbelievable. And he says he followed these on for maybe about a good 20, 30 yards, well before the tree line. And then all of a sudden, like we've all heard before, gone. And then his mind starts clicking. Holy cow, maybe the people back in town aren't pulling my leg, because the only thing he starts thinking this maybe Bigfoot, right? So he doesn't go into town. He doesn't make any mention of this. He just kind of goes about his business. 2 weeks go by and nothing. So one night, again, it's at nighttime, dusky dawn, sun is just starting to set in the horizon. He hears that roar, that deep guttural roar. Dogs once again beeline underneath the dining room table. He says this time it doesn't happen once, but it happens twice. And he says this time, Rob, I think it's closer to my house because it was much louder. He's on the lower level, and the dog's underneath the dining room table, Larry, Moe, and Curly. And he looks out through his windows, sees nothing. The roar stops. He said it happened twice. And then, for whatever the reason, he wants to go up on his deck. Now, I did make mention earlier in this particular story that he had a telescope out there, and it was still kind of, the sun was still kind of going down. And as he's walking up, he tries to get the dogs with him to come with him. They just want to stay underneath the dining room table. So he's going up his staircase leading to the top level, out to the balcony where the telescope is. And he says, Rob, I get maybe 30 feet to the telescope, and he says, I see something standing there from the ground. And he says, Rob, my second level is probably about 15 feet up. And he goes, and I see this image of a person covered in hair with a fleshy face. Then all of a sudden, he says it kind of drops down from the top of the balcony, kind of drops down. And he says, I'm frozen. I don't want to advance forward. I don't know what this is. He says he must have stood there for maybe 5 minutes before he even ventured forward. Then he ventures forward finally after getting his composure together, ventures forward onto the deck where this thing was, and he doesn't see anything. Now it's already dark and he really can't utilize the telescope. He goes down to the bottom level. He goes out, walks out again, and he goes, sure enough, there were those footprints. And the footprints were engraved. They were right there where this thing was standing. So he sees them, and once again, these footprints they go right out toward the tree line, then they stop. So the next morning, he goes into town because he says, "Well, I think that I have Sasquatch." So he goes back into town, tries to find some of the locals that would always kid him as he was saying about Sasquatch, and then he started asking some questions. And then they told him, yeah, they weren't BSing you. They are around here. We're just, not trying to steer you or make you move away, but they're here. So he goes, wow, I think I got one on my property. What should I do? This, that, and the other. And they say, well, really nothing you can do, right? I mean, what are you going to do? So this man, all of a sudden, Linda goes into research mode. So, yeah, there's nothing I can do. I'm retired, nothing else to do. I'm going to start looking. So a week goes by, he gets up enough gumption, right? He goes, yeah, I'm going to go look into the forest. He never really ventured into the forest in back of his house because that wasn't his thing. He just enjoyed where he was at. And he says, Rob, I must have researched and looked for more tracks and trails for like 3 months. He said he went on and found nothing. And he says, and the unusual thing after 3 months, he said, you know what, I'm giving up. I haven't had any return events take place. I'm just going to accept that I probably have a Sasquatch around here or whatever it is he's thinking. Goes back home, but he says, I did the weirdest thing. He says, when I left, emerged from the tree line, walking back toward his property, he stopped. He turned into the woods and he yells. He goes, Rob, I don't even know why I said this. He goes, okay, you must be gone. I'm looking for you now. Something of those words. I can't, not verbatim. I don't know. The next night, that roar appears, right? The same day that he had said that. He hears this roar. Yep, he's still out there. And he says, however, this time it didn't show itself. It didn't go on his property. There's no tracks or footprints. And he says, ever since that final night, that final roar, and he says, now this has been 8 years later, he hasn't had or heard anything since. So I thought that was pretty cool. I thought it
Well,
was a
that
pretty,
is cool. Yeah,
you
I
know,
agree. That's an interesting story. It's almost it's almost surreal sometimes, how the coincidences of things happen and the synchronicities of how these things occur kind of lead you down a path and of discovery.
Oh, absolutely. And I do find, Linda, too, that it's which is kind of, I don't know if this is odd. I don't find it odd anymore. Maybe I did several years ago. People that have no interest in these subjects seem to be the people that come across these things more often. You always hear the story about the family camping in the forest and a Sasquatch maybe ran through their camp. On the other flip side of the coin is you have people that are staunch researchers for 20 years and never seen one, right? They've seen the evidence that we've all come across, sure, the footprints, all this, that, and the other, and they're frustrated at that. But when the average Joe or Sally, who has no intentions to find any, they show up. And I think that all goes back towards our intentions, don't you think? I think these creatures are very smart. They know what if we're looking for them, they're not going to show themselves. We always heard the same old story over and over again, over and over again. You don't find Sasquatch, he finds you.
That's
And
what
I
I've heard
think,
from
and I think,
numerous people. Yeah.
yeah, and I think the other thing about that is I think we all vibrate differently, frequencies that we put off because Sasquatch can sense if your intentions aren't good, they're going to stay away from a human being. But if they're kind of like nonchalant and really don't care, then I think they're more susceptible to showing themselves, or maybe not showing themselves, Linda, just being a little more carefree and maybe give you a glimpse. You know what I mean? I mean, I hear that so many times.
Yeah, a glimpse, a sound, something of that nature. Wrapping it up a little bit here, tell us where can people go buy those two books that you have out?
Thank you so much. You can find them on Amazon.com. Simply type Bigfoot Michigan Rob in your Amazon browser. They'll pull up. I kind of set it up that way because that's also the name of my channel where you can find me
Exactly.
where you can find me 4 days a week. Thanks, Linda. Yeah, those are fascinating. I got so many, and I know you got to wrap it up, but yeah, I do thank you for coming on, letting me come on. You were on a month ago. Also, I'm looking forward to meeting you in person when we do our conference in Missouri.
Absolutely. Now, when is that? How can people
Yeah,
get to that
that
conference?
is Richmond, Missouri, September 19th and 20th. Yeah, you can find that on Eventbrite. If you go to my channel or the Blondes and Booze channel, the links are right there. And we've sold so many tickets already. And this is going to be a feat. And one quick plug: if people are vendors, we still are looking for vendors. We got a whole bunch of them. But if you sell any sort of wares, it doesn't have to be Bigfoot, cryptid related, because this conference covers UFOs, cryptids, and paranormal. There's going to be 20, including Linda. There's going to be special guests and speakers there. It's going to be fabulous. If you have anything to sell, bring it on down. It could be arts and crafts, books, whatever. $75, pretty cheap. I understand there are a lot more at a lot of these conferences. So yeah, very cheap. Go to eventbrite.com.
Sounds good. I look forward to meeting you and a whole slew of other Bigfoot people up there. So, yeah, it's going to be a really fun event. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming on Bigfoot Michigan Rob. Be sure and check out his channel. And I want to thank my audience for watching and be sure and subscribe to my channel so we can keep these wonderful stories going. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Bye bye.